When learning that the Ohara incident was at least one part of the main reasons why Dragon forged the Revolutionary Army, I now want to know if the next chapter will be where we learn the full origin story of Luffy's father. So I doubt that the full origin story is coming anytime soon, not in the immediate future anyway, but this did give us a surprising amount of insight into Dragon, specifically that he does not have his tattoo yet. It's quite a bold aesthetic, and I'd always sort of assumed that it had something to do with the genesis of the Revolutionary Army, because he does have the tattoo by the time he comes around saving Sabo in the Goa Kingdom, which seemed like the early days of the army, but we now know that it was started long before then, before Luffy was born actually. The Revolutionary Army officially formed 21 years ago according to the timeline given by Vegapunk, which gives Dragon almost a full decade to explain their tattoo. Maybe it was as simple as a marketing decision. Like there was a staff meeting one day where Dragon said, "You guys, nobody's taking the freedom fighters seriously. So I, Dragon, have had a clever idea. What I'm gonna do, right, is get this like really sick tat. It's gonna cover half of my face and it's gonna make me look like a fearsome manly man. Meanwhile, Ivankov, I'm sending you to prison to do some hard jail time. And Kuma, we're going to turn you into a rotund Terminator. And after that, everyone will take the freedom fighters seriously." In case you can't tell, one of the things that really made me laugh in this chapter was the fact that they were originally called the Freedom Fighters. I mean, fair enough, Justice League is taken, but I'm really glad that they decided to workshop the name a bit more. Fun fact, young Dragon takes some clothing inspiration from Fidel Castro. Dragon's flagship is also called the Wind Granma, Granma being the name of the yacht Castro used to commence the Cuban Revolution. Back to the tattoo though, if it doesn't have to do with the founding of the army, then my next stop would be that it has something to do with Luffy's mother. And after whatever inevitable tragedy occurred with Mother D. Luffy, Dragon marked himself and fully committed himself to the mission of changing the world. Changing the world, one half of a face at a time. But first, it's dog time. Because this video is sponsored by Established Titles, a project based on a Scottish custom whereby landowners are referred to as lords, lairds, and ladies in English. In fact, my dog has recently become Lord Don Quixote Dog Flamingo, who has caused quite the ruckus on Fishman Island and has been deemed a disturber of the peace. Title packs give you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land with a unique plot number on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland. And with them you can officially include the title of Lord, Laird, or Lady on credit cards and stuff. It's amazing. Established Titles is a fun and novel way to preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland, and Established Titles plants a tree with every order, working with global charities to support restoration efforts. Plus, the first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my link will be effectively next to my plot. So depending on how many of you want to be lords and ladies, we could even build our own little Scottish Grandland Kingdom. Go to establishedtitles.com/dogflamingo to shop their Black Friday sale and get an additional 10% off using code DOGFLAMINGO to support the channel and my dog's ego. Speaking of, Dog Flamingo has been evicted from Fishman Island along with Caribou and the Starfish and is now floating onwards onto what is hopefully but probably not Scotland. So do that thing, but for now it's back to you. Me? Elbaf is going to be the most important arc, along with Skypiea based on the story. Possibly, but it's not just those two. The general pattern with One Piece is that the isolated islands are always a goldmine of lore. Fishman Island and Wano are other great examples of stuff being heavily seeded or heavily paying off in the grander narrative scheme of things. But we're building up to the point where I'm not sure that Elbaf can be a shorter arc anymore. While it's far from confirmed yet, all signs are very much pointing to this island right now, like some sort of narrative log pose. Before, we were kind of directionless, which is a fun way to experience adventure. But it's not the most efficient way to, say, find something like some sort of final road poneglyph. But now we have a solid clue being a mountain of books on Elbaf. It only seems natural that we go there, and it should appeal greatly to Luffy and his sense of adventure because giants and big things and like meat, like giant meat, like Luffy's there. The thing that's really gonna tell us what kind of arc Elbaf is going to be is when we meet the main antagonist, because it's One Piece and the Straw Hats have never landed on an island and had to deal with no conflict whatsoever. Big or small, there's always some sort of enemy to deal with. The thing is though, where do you go from here? After having beaten Kaido, I think it's gonna be real hard to try and get an island-specific antagonist. I mean, I just can't imagine the crew landing and having Haruden going, "Captain Luffy, sir, I'm so glad you're here. Jeremy Giantson from down the road is causing a bit of a scene and we need your help to save our kingdom." Like, you can't go from Kaido to a Hody Jones style antagonist. You need them to be at least on par or even escalate as stories like to do. And one option here may be Prince Loki himself. In keeping with the name Loki, well, he doesn't have the greatest of reputations in Norse mythology. So we could be on our way to a classic overthrow the kingdom kind of arc. And Loki himself is a character whose abilities are completely unknown. He could be absurdly powerful. Although Oda could turn all of this all the way around and just zero in on Loki being some sort of trickster prince. Like a playful yet useless monarch who just tells bad jokes. Alternatively though, Elbaf could see an external antagonist antagonist. Maybe an admiral, or if we are seriously gearing up towards the end, maybe even a Blackbeard. Although the rare exception to the conflict rule has occurred on Long Ring Longland, where it did have a conflict. However, it was, well, it was foxy, and it was mostly played out to be a bit of good fun with a jolt of heavy icing of plot right on top of the end. So maybe even a Davy back fight against, say, the Red Hair Pirates. This chapter made me realize that Aokiji never followed the type of justice Akainu follows. Instead of shattering Sol after leaving him, he left him there, probably knowing the fire would thaw him out and he'd be safe from the Marines. Yeah, it definitely paints Kuzan as a much more innocent shade of blue. But I should say that Kuzan never followed Sakazuki's brand of justice. For much of his career, Oda stated that Kuzan's motto was fired up justice, which is definitely different from absolute. It just meant that Kuzan, as a relatively younger man, was much more willing and eager before Ohara took him to the point of no return. You know, I actually wonder if this action might be the origin of lazy justice. Like, yeah, according to duties and such, I'm supposed to kill Sol, but let's just cover him with ice and call it done, because maybe it is. Dunno, too lazy to check. It's definitely worth asking if Kuzan knows if Sol is alive. I'm inclined to believe that he doesn't know, or at the very least he didn't, because when speaking to Robin at Water 7, Kuzan did say that Sol gave his life for her. So if he did know, I think it's more likely that he found out during the time skip when he was traveling all across the world before all of the Blackbeard stuff began, which would be both good and bad. Good because, hey, my friend's alive, that's nice. But also bad because this could give Blackbeard a lead into the knowledge he needs to becoming the Pirate King, or potentially even lead him to Elbaf itself. One note I want to make is that some people were upset about Sol being alive because he was stated to be dead in the One Piece Vivia Card databook. But, we've heard that before. At one point, Sabo was even confirmed dead by a databook, so we should know that nothing is set in stone, which I will say is a bit of a shame, because these are supposed to be the one place where things are thoroughly in stone. Those cards are literally just raw data, and if they're not accurate, then there's no real point to buying them. Sol being the man marked by flames is very likely given this chapter. I know there are other names thrown out, but the timing of it all, I can't say I think it's a coincidence. This has probably become my favorite thought regarding the man marked by flames. Whether it's fire burns or ice burns or both burns, it could be both burns. Either way, this dude is covered in burns from head to toe, and that toe is noticeably several times the size of a standard issue human head. So if anyone in this world deserves to be labeled as a man marked by flames, it is definitely Sol. It would also make that conversation hit a bit harder in retrospect, because when the man marked by flames was brought up, Oda gave Robin a very specific close-up, as if she had heard of this man. And maybe Robin is just like us. Perhaps during the time skip she became aware of a man marked by flames and concocted her own crackpot theory that, hey, that could be Sol. And so this interaction between Robin and Vegapunk is almost like an interaction between a fan and Oda. Hey, just one question. Could you please confirm my headcanon theory? And then Vegapunk's all like, who knows? Maybe. Wink. Sol living makes Brook's backstory the most heartbreaking. Don't even really know where to begin here, because I think it's very difficult to power scale backstories. We can't really measure despair and tragedy in the same way that we can try to measure the punch fighting. I don't think it takes anything away from Robin's backstory, but it does give her a much needed ray of hope. Finally anything went right in this incredibly unfair world. I do also think that Brook is a bit of a bad comparison to try and make this point, because he may very well have his own moment just like this. Something we should never forget is that Calico Yorkie had an incredibly vague send-off in Brook's flashback. It would not at all surprise me if he managed to find a way to cure the disease and is in fact alive to this very day. And unlike Sol, Yorkie's death was never confirmed in any of the data books. It's all still just status unknown. You know what though? I'm gonna throw this question back at you. Who do you guys think has the saddest backstory of any of the Straw Hats? Because I still think it's Robin, or Chopper, or Sanji. Basically anyone is in this contest except for Zoro and Usopp. Before this chapter, everyone was saying this arc was going to be a Frankie arc, but Oda went, lol, no, Robin arc. Yeah, I've got to be real here. I do think we pulled the trigger on the Frankie bingo just a little bit too early here. But I do still think that it's now or never for Frankie. How is there ever going to be a more appropriate island out there for his story? With that said, Egghead Island so far is nothing short of masterfully composed, because it doesn't just have a singular focus. Instead, it's working on weaving and entwining an entire series of long-running threads into the nexus point that is Vegapunk. Frankie, Bonnie, Robin, Kuma, Elbaf, Dragon, and with Dragon by association Luffy. There is just so much being precariously balanced on this island. Vegapunk is true to the concept of Stella, because it's like he's a star in the center of this narrative solar system, with all of the various plot planets revolving around him. The audience never quite knowing just how much of this world his actions are influencing. Vegapunk is to secrets what Odin was to piracy, the central point that connects affects almost everything. I'm inclined to believe Dr. Vegapunk's goofy tongue was a joke Oda sat on for 15 years. So what we do know is that Oda has been sitting on this exact design for over a decade. Because when we saw Vegapunk's silhouette on Punk Hazard, the now trademark Mega Aubergine head was certainly there. However, the design is noticeably different from the first incarnation when his body was much more standard. Like, Oda may have had the head and the Einstein face locked in, but there has definitely been some changes here. There's some evolution. Right now though, the funniest thing for me to think about is that Oda had to try and write this character as a very serious figure, with all of the ties to the world government, Sentomaru, Kizaru, with bad weapons, etc. But whilst writing this very to be taken seriously background character, he knew the whole time that Vegapunk was just going to be this wacky old man. And it's one of those situations where he probably had to hold back laughter every time he was dropping new Vegapunk lore. I've also been thinking about why Vegapunk does seem a bit jarringly wacky, and I think it's because he evokes a sense of classic One Piece. Because we call modern One Piece goofy and everything, but the really cartoony days come from the early Grand Line era. And if Oda had this exact face in mind since alluding to Vegapunk on Alabasta, then I think that would make perfect sense. It's a classic design introduced in the modern era. Because for all of the weirdness we see, Oda has definitely matured his design significantly since then. I'm hoping that we get to see Bonnie play a bigger part in this, like most of the worst generation. Maybe her fruit can work on objects once evolved, to bring back the ancient weapons from the old war. Maybe even fix her dad. Right now it looks like Bonnie is set up to be our next Trafalgar Law. But maybe not a whole Trafalgar Law, but like a mini law. Law Light. Diet Law. Law 0.5. One of those. We don't even know the full scope of it yet, but Bonnie already has one of the most heartbreaking worst generation backstories since Law. So Oda is going pretty all out in endearing her to us. He wants us to really feel for Bonnie, and I do hope that means she's going to be much more prominent as a result. One of my biggest fears with Bonnie, and in fact still with the Rouge, is that they would turn out to be more on the Hawkins side of the worst generation spectrum, as opposed to the Law side, which is the good side. And Bonnie is definitely leaning much more lawwards, which I like. But here's a relevant question. What are the odds right now that Kuma is coming back? I ask this because Oda does have a special thing for the father-daughter relationship. He himself is a father of 2 daughters, and once the first one was born, Oda's writing started to noticeably change, as if he was drawing from his own life experience as a father. That's where you get arcs like Rebecca and Kyros, the father's drive to protect the daughter, and also stuff like Pound, Lola, and Chiffon. I think Oda brought Pound back because he just couldn't bear the thought of a father not having a happy ending with his 2 daughters, because that's kind of a direct mirror to his life. So in the case of Bonnie and Kuma, judging from the roadmaps available, I don't know if Oda could deny Bonnie that closure with her father, and if not a happy ending, then at least some sort of full stop moment. But while we wait for that, here's another video because you haven't finished cleaning yet. Bad you, but don't worry, I've got you covered.